In the summer of 1991, Milwaukee police entered a small apartment on North 25th Street. What they found inside stunned investigators and riveted a nation. Photographs, jars, and evidence suggesting a pattern of crimes. The scene was more than a single murder. It was the trace of a long, hidden story. The man who lived there appeared ordinary to neighbors. His name, Jeffrey Lionel Dahmer. Jeffrey Dahmer was born May 21, 1960, in Milwaukee. His early years, by most accounts, began unremarkably, but people who looked back described a sensitive, solitary boy. A childhood operation and recurrent family tensions are often mentioned in later interviews and biographies. From a young age, he collected animal bones and specimens, a private curiosity that, in hindsight, became one of many early signals of an unusual relationship with death and control. By high school, Dahmer had withdrawn. He began drinking. Teachers and classmates called him odd, but harmless. That would change. In June 1978, shortly after graduating high school, Dahmer picked up an 18-year-old hitchhiker, Stephen Hicks. The two drank and talked. When Hicks attempted to leave, the encounter turned deadly. Dahmer later admitted he struck Hicks and killed him. He dismembered and buried remains near the family home. Dahmer later described this first killing as unplanned, an emergency born of panic and obsessive attachment.
After the first killing, Dahmer attempted to build a conventional life. He briefly attended college, enlisted in the Army, and worked odd jobs. Alcohol problems followed him. He drifted between homes, sometimes staying with his grandmother. To those around him, he was merely a troubled young man. Privately, darker impulses persisted. By the late 1980s, those impulses returned and intensified. The crimes that followed were no longer isolated. They revealed patterns and ritual.
Dahmer moved into apartment 213 at the Oxford Apartments. Between 1988 and 1991, the unit became the site where most of his known crimes were committed. Over time, he lured young men there with promises of money, alcohol, and photography. Dahmer's method often involved inviting men for a drink or photos, intoxicating them, and then killing them. He photographed victims and kept parts of their bodies, behavior investigators would later interpret as attempts at control and permanence. In interviews after arrest, Dahmer said he wanted to prevent abandonment. He wanted to keep people close to him. Behind every headline, there were lives. Young men, each with a story, each with dreams, all ended by Jeffrey Dahmer. Let's look at the ones whose stories changed how the world saw this case.
Not because I was angry with them, not because I hated them, but because I wanted to keep them with me. And as my obsession grew, I was saving body parts such as skulls and skeletons, and eventually I did turn to cannibalism.
Anthony Sears, The Turning Point, 1989. Anthony was an inspiring model, handsome, confident, and full of life. He met Dahmer by chance at a club. This was the first time Dahmer decided to keep parts of his victim, a disturbing sign of his deepening obsession.
For investigators, Sears's case later revealed how Dahmer's crimes were escalating in both planning and cruelty. Errol Lindsay, The Experiment, 1991. Errol was only 19. Dahmer said he wanted to create a living companion, someone who would never leave. He attempted what he called an experiment, injecting substances into Errol's skull to make him unconscious and compliant. It didn't work. Errol died soon after, one of the most tragic examples of Dahmer's delusion. Tony Hughes, The Quiet Soul, 1991. Tony was deaf but full of kindness. He and Dahmer communicated through written notes. For several days, Tony stayed in Dahmer's apartment, believing he had found a friend. But his life ended there, like the others. When police later found his remains, Tony's story broke the hearts of millions because it showed how Dahmer could appear caring while hiding evil. Konorek Synthosophone, The Missed Chance, 1991. Perhaps the most heartbreaking case. Konorek was only 14 years old. He escaped Dahmer's apartment once, frightened and disoriented, and was found by neighbors on the street. But when police arrived, Dahmer convinced them it was just a domestic situation. They returned the boy to Dahmer's hands. Soon after, Konorek was killed. That failure became one of the most shocking moments in police history, a chance to stop Dahmer that was tragically lost. Oliver Lacey, The Final Days, 1991. Oliver was one of Dahmer's last victims. By then, Dahmer's world was falling apart. He was losing control. When police entered the apartment days later, Oliver's remains were among the evidence that ended the horror. His death marked the point where the nightmare finally reached its breaking end.
Branching out, that's when the cannibalism started, eating of the heart and the arm muscle. It was a way of making me feel that they were a part of me.
On July 22, 1991, a young man, Tracy Edwards, escaped from Dahmer and ran into the street, flagged down police, and led them back to the building. Officers entered the apartment and discovered Polaroid images and human remains in the refrigerator. The evidence was overwhelming. Dahmer's murder trial began in January 1992. He pleaded guilty but insane. His defense argued mental disease, while prosecutors presented forensic and eyewitness evidence showing awareness and planning. Medical experts gave differing opinions about his mental state. The jury concluded he knew what he was doing. He was convicted and sentenced to consecutive life terms. Court records show multiple life terms handed down at trial. Public reaction was intense, a mix of horror, anger, and questions about systemic failures. The case raised painful questions about policing, marginalization, and how vulnerable communities are protected or ignored. Why did Jeffrey Dahmer do what he did? Psychologists avoid simple answers. In Dahmer's case, experts point to a confluence of risk factors: early social isolation, substance abuse, personality patterns, and a compulsive need for control and possession. Dahmer described his actions in ways that suggest a desperate attempt to avoid abandonment, to make those he feared losing into permanent objects in his life. This is not an apology or explanation that absolves. It is an attempt to understand the interactions between personality, trauma, and choice While incarcerated at the Columbia Correctional Institution in Wisconsin, Dahmer reportedly read, attended religious services, and corresponded with his father. Yet his notoriety made him a target within prison culture. On November 28, 1994, while assigned to work detail cleaning a prison gym, Dahmer was attacked by another inmate, Christopher Scarver, and died of his injuries. He was 34. His death removed a person many saw as monstrous, but it did not resolve the deeper questions his crimes raised. Jeffrey Dahmer's crimes shocked the world, not only because of what he did, but because he appeared ordinary in many ways. His case forced uncomfortable conversations about social isolation, policing failures, and how society protects, or fails to protect, vulnerable people. Most importantly, the victims must remain central to any telling, their names, their families, their losses. We tell this story to remember, not to sensationalize, to ask hard questions, and to try, in some small way, to make sure such darkness is not left unnoticed again.